Welcome back. As we mentioned, the government shutdown is now officially the longest ever in American history. And President Trump is in part blaming the shutdown for Republicans' poor performances in last night's elections. And today, the Senate's top Democrat, Chuck Schumer, says he agrees with President Trump.
Trump admits that the Republican shutdown is hurting him and his party. The president is right. We warned the president of the consequences of ignoring Democrats, ignoring the American people, ignoring the health care crisis. We warned the president that ignoring Democrats and insisting on zero negotiations was a recipe for disaster and would come back to haunt him. Well, Republicans shouldn't ignore us anymore, for their own good and the country's good.
But after last night's Democratic sweep, the big question remains, what is the off-ramp from the shutdown? While Democrats are demanding Republicans come to the table, the president is standing firm, telling Republicans they have to bypass Democrats by eliminating the filibuster or the 60-vote threshold in the Senate.
It's time for Republicans to do what they have to do, and that's terminate the filibuster. It's the only way you can do it. And if you don't terminate the filibuster, you'll be in bad shape. I think it's very important. We have to get the country open, and the way we're going to do it this afternoon is to terminate the filibuster. And it's possible you're not going to do that, and I'm going to go by your wishes. You're very smart people. We're good friends, but I think it's a tremendous mistake, really. It would be a tragic mistake, actually.
Today, Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune giving his blunt assessment of the president's demand.
I think the president's views on the filibuster, have been long held, and everybody. It's not like that surprised anybody. I just know where the math is on this issue in the Senate, and it's just not happening.
Joining me now is senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur. Sahil, thanks so much for being here. So yesterday there seemed to be some optimism among senators that there could be a deal to end the shutdown potentially as soon as this week. I was hearing Friday. Is that still the sentiment on the Hill, or has some momentum been lost?
It is not still the sentiment on Capitol Hill, Kristen. I would say there's more pessimism today than there was yesterday about ending the shutdown anytime soon. And there were two specific things that happened yesterday that have halted that momentum. The first is not just that Democrats won. Most of these elections were in blue states and Democrats were expected to win, but it was the degree of the thumping that voters delivered to Republicans that has really caught many people off guard, including Democrats who didn't quite expect to win by this much. The second is, as you just pointed out, President Trump himself freely admitting that the shutdown is helping Democrats politically, and it's one of the reasons they won across the country in all those races. By the way, not just in the blue states, but they gained seats in the legislative space in red states like Mississippi. So there's already been a push in recent days from progressives saying Democrats cannot cave now empty-handed, or it would simply undercut their own base. How can even the moderate Democrats who wanted to cut a deal and find an off-ramp now be able to walk away and say it's time to reopen the government when they are pretty obviously winning this fight, even according to President Trump? That is probably the biggest reason that these talks among centrists are, let's say, they've hit a snag today.
Well, let's talk about this back and forth over the filibuster. President Trump was pretty firm in his demand, and Leader Thune effectively said the math is the math. It's just not going to happen. I've been talking to some sources who say, wait a minute, given the losses overnight, it is possible that some Republicans could start to feel more pressure to move their position on getting rid of the filibuster. What are you hearing, Sahil?
A few things, Kristen. Firstly, Senator Thune is right about the math. He does not have 50 out of the 53 votes he would need. In fact, I can easily count to 4 very, very deeply dug-in, firm no's on the filibuster who I don't think are going to switch under any circumstances. That said, President Trump does have a way of moving votes around here. He is moving some Republicans who were previously in the no column as recently as last week to a maybe or potentially yes. That includes senators like Tommy Tuberville, Jim Banks, Ron Johnson, who have all expressed some interest in nuking the filibuster filibuster, or at least creating a carve-out in response to Trump's demands. The predicament here is that Trump wants to reopen the government. He recognizes the shutdown is bad in a whole host of ways and also damaging to his party politically, but he doesn't want to negotiate with Democrats, and Republicans don't want to nuke the filibuster, which means they either negotiate with Democrats or count on them to cave. Caving is less likely after yesterday, Kirsten. So this is a multi-dimensional paradox they're in.
Meanwhile, lines getting longer outside food banks, delays piling up at airports. Sahil, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Joining me now here in studio is Virginia Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan. Congresswoman McClellan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I know it was a late night for you as well, so we appreciate your coming in. Let's start right there with the government shutdown. Do you have a sense that the government could reopen by the end of the week? What are the vibes that you're getting?
I think the only way the government is going to reopen is if Republicans come to the table and talk to Democrats. And in the House, you know, Speaker Johnson has shown no interest in doing that. At least there are talks on the Senate side. But in the House, we haven't been in session, voting, in committee hearings, anything since September 19th. So from day one, Democrats have been ready to negotiate a bipartisan budget, not just for a few weeks, but for, you know, the entire appropriations period, and Republicans don't seem interested.
What do you say to the argument that Democrats had a series of big victories overnight? You've proven your point. Now it's time to reopen the government and then negotiate over health care subsidies, which expire at the end of the year.
I think anybody with that message isn't listening to the voters. What the voters said yesterday is we repudiate the policies of Donald Trump and the congressional Republicans. We are worried about the economy, which Donald Trump got elected saying he was going to lower costs. He's done everything but. He's raised costs. We heard voters say we're worried about health care. We're worried about when we see open enrollment and our premiums spike. We're worried about these Medicaid cuts. We're worried about our hospitals closing. We're worried about federal workers who have been fired. That was the message of last night's election, is they want leaders who are focused on their problems, putting people over politics.
Fair enough. And yet federal workers are caught in the middle of this battle. In fact, Virginia has more federal workers impacted than almost any other state, which you know all too well. People are suffering. Again, they're having to go to food banks just to feed their families. They're afraid about the food assistance programs that they may rely on. Is it time for both sides to come together and come off of their sticking points and say, OK, we're going to figure out a way to reopen the government?
Democrats have been ready to talk and negotiate from day one of this administration, from day one of the 119th Congress. And Republicans have made clear, we don't want to talk to you. Now, I've talked to federal workers, including one that I had on a town hall meeting, several of them at the polling places, and they have said, thank you for fighting for us. They are upset at the way they were treated before the shutdown happened, when 200,000 of them were fired, some with less than 15 minutes of notice. They feel like they are being villainized and that they are being thrown away, and they're upset about it. And a lot of them came out and voted against Republicans yesterday and said they specifically came out because of what's happening in Washington.
Let me ask you about the election results. Last night, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries saying that the Democratic Party is back. That's a direct quote. Do you agree with that assessment, or do you think that's overstated? Does the Democratic Party still have a lot of work to do before it's viable again in the midterms?
I think the Democratic Party is viable in the midterms if we stick to a winning formula of meeting voters where they are, talking to them about the issues that matter to them, addressing the concerns that they raise, and meeting them everywhere where they are, and leaving no corner of the Commonwealth, of the country behind, and talking to everyone, not just our base.
I do want to ask you about the race for Attorney General. Jay Jones won, despite the fact that his campaign was clouded by this controversy over texts that he had sent back in 2022. They were texts with violent messages about his political enemies. A number of people called for him to drop out of the race. Abigail Spanberger, the governor-elect, did stand by him. This is what the current governor, Glenn Youngkin, had to say about it. Take a look.
I have to say I am incredibly concerned about the Attorney General-elect's ability to do the job based on the text that he sent. You can't come into this job if you are espousing death on a political enemy, the death of children, and the death of law enforcement. I believe, just as I've always believed, that disqualifies him for the job.
Congresswoman, do you believe that Jay Jones can serve as the top law enforcement official in your state?
I do. I served with Jay Jones in the Virginia General Assembly, and those texts do not represent who Jay is. There's something he said in a private conversation in the heat of the moment, but he will fight for Virginians. He will fight for every Virginian, our federal workers. He will fight for our rights. He will fight to make sure that electric bills go down. He will fight against gun violence. He will fight to protect our civil rights and our voting rights. And that's what the voters were more concerned about. If every politician was voted out of office for the worst thing they ever said in a private conversation, half of Congress and the president wouldn't be in office right now.
Let me ask you about some of the gains Democrats made down ballot in your state in the House of Delegates, where you served for over a decade. There's now a discussion, should Virginia join California, for example, in a push for a mid-cycle redistricting effort in an attempt to gain additional Democratic seats. What say you? Would you support that effort?
Ultimately, it's up to the voters. What the General Assembly has done is passed a constitutional amendment very narrowly drawn that says if other states engage in midterm redistricting at the will of the president for any reason other than a court order or to comply with the Voting Rights Act, then Virginia should be able to respond in kind. But that has to be approved by the voters before any maps can even be drawn.
What would you like to see happen, given the fact that you do have in Texas Republicans saying they want to add an additional 5 seats?
I would like to see Republicans come back from the brink and stop trying to change the rules mid-cycle. Redistricting is supposed to be done every 10 years in response to the census or in response to a court order. But they went down this road, and what is good for the goose is good for the gander, and we can't sit with our hands tied behind our backs, especially if that's not what the voters want us to do.
Just finally, do you worry this could become a tit for tat that could wind up backfiring ultimately?
You know, to be honest, having lived through redistricting twice, I think the Republicans are overestimating what they can gain through redistricting. What the results in Virginia showed yesterday, you had Republican drawn seats. You had seats that went for Donald Trump by double digits flip because there were candidates up and down the ballot who came out and met voters where they were and presented a message that resonated with them against the backdrop of what's happening in Washington. And we have seen time and time again, at least in Virginia, you think you're drawing a safe map for one party or the other, and the voters have a different result in mind. We ought to draw maps that make sense, that are compact, that are contiguous, that have fair districts, that are competitive, and we do it once every 10 years in response to the census. But the Republicans began this game. If they want to continue down this road, I don't think Democrats should sit on the sidelines and just watch it happen, especially if the voters want us to respond.
All right, Congresswoman McClellan, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your perspective.
Thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.